to the 4th tutorial in this series all about mosaics. And for this video we're going to be taking a closer look at grouting, which is an aspect of mosaics that is very easy to overlook and yet can have a huge impact on your work. But first of all, what actually is grout? Well, grout is a mixture of very fine sand or silica that has been mixed with cement so that it binds to itself when wet and it dries nice and solid. And so long as you mixed it up correctly, then it should dry with only a minimal amount of shrinkage as well. Now, there are many types of grout on the market, and you certainly don't need to use one that has specifically targeted towards the arts and crafts folk. In fact, these tend to be very pricey for quite a small amount of grout. Your standard bathroom or kitchen tile grout is cheap, easy to use, it usually comes in white, which is the easiest base colour to work with, and it is plenty fine enough to work with your mosaics. And as an added benefit, it also tends to be stain resistant as well. The next choice you need to make is, do you want to use a pre-mixed grout, or do you want to use one that comes as a powder? And again, in the interest of saving money, I would always prefer to work with powders. You can just mix up the exact amount that you need, and you don't have to worry about the remainder going off before you come to use it again. And believe me, no matter how tight the lid is on pre-mixed grouts, they always seem to have dried right before you need to use them. And if you're going to be buying grout online, then it's also going to save you a small fortune in postage by buying powdered, simply because it is so much lighter than pre-mixed grout. So not only are powdered grouts cheap and easy to buy, they are also very easy to work with. All powdered grouts are mixed in exactly the same way, and all you need is a washable scratch-proof bowl, such as a cereal bowl for example, a spoon, your grout of choice and some water. Then simply pour some of your grout into the bowl and add water to it very slowly, 1 spoonful at a time, stirring the mixture in between each spoonful just so that you can check its consistency. And keep going until you've got something that resembles a very thick toothpaste. It should be able to be spread over your mosaics nice and easily without applying too much pressure or needing to scrub it, but it also shouldn't look overly wet, and it certainly shouldn't be sodden or dripping. If you've accidentally added too much water to your grout mix, then you can just top it up with more powder again, and you can keep going on like this until you get just the right consistency. And this way you can play about with mixtures, safe in the knowledge that grout is a really forgiving material. It's not going to spoil while you're trying to get it just right for yourself. But what if you don't want to be working with white grout? What if you in fact want it to be grey, for example? Well, the colour of grout that you choose is going to have a really strong impact on the overall ambience of your work. Take these 3 little swatches for example. Each one is made from the exact same mix of red, yellow and orangey coloured tiles. All of them are the same brand and all of them are in this offset brick style pattern. And yet, by applying either white, grey or black grout, we can dramatically change the look of the piece. White grout on mosaic always looks stark. It is clean and bright and strong and modern, and it puts you in the mind of clean bathrooms and kitchens. In most cases, white grout is as much a part of the mosaic as the tiles are. Grey grout, on the other hand, is trying to sink into the background. It is more outdoors, stone-like if you will. It's close to the colour of flagstones and concrete. It sort of shies away. It lets the tiles really shine for themselves so that they stand out. Black grout, on the other hand, is a statement all by itself. It creates a very high contrast, and black really draws the eye. If anything, it stands out even more than the tiles do. This can be modern and edgy, but it can also make a piece feel quite messy if you're not careful, so do be careful about using pure black by itself. Which colour of grout you choose though depends very much on the piece that you're creating and how much do you want that grout to stand out. If in doubt though, I would always go with a pale grey, as it tends to work in most situations. Always bear in mind as well though that if you're working with very pale tiles, then black grout will stain them unless they are perfectly watertight. So ceramic tiles for example tend to be stained quite easily, while vitreous glass is much more resistant. But how do you get that grey grout in the first place? Well, option 1 is to go out and buy grey grout. Most hobby sellers will have a grey option for you, and this is by far the easiest method, with just one pretty obvious limitation. You are stuck with their selection of grey. If it is too light or too dark, then you're going to have to mix your own anyway. What option 2 is you can literally do just that. There is absolutely no difference between two grouts of different colours, other than the colour. They are made from exactly the same process, using exactly the same materials, and they can be blended together to produce any shade of grey that you're after. Do note though that black grout, as I said before, is very, very strong, and the tiniest little bit of it added to white will have a strong effect. Also, don't try to mix grouts as dry powder, because as soon as you wet it, that black coloration is going to hugely intensify, and so it's really difficult to estimate exactly how dark your grout is going to end up being. Best to start off with a wet white mixture and then add little bits of black grout to it, just the tiniest little bit at a time, stirring thoroughly to assess exactly how much more you're going to need to add, remembering as well that it will dry just fractionally paler. And option 3 is to use acrylic paints. Do stick to acrylic because oil paints don't dry very well and watercolours tend to fade too much. But a little bit of acrylic paint added into your white ground has just that perfect amount of pigment in it. The acrylic won't have any effect on the consistency of your grout so long as you only use a very small amount, and if you do use too much, you'll just find it makes the grout look a bit shiny. And mixing your own grout for any colour really is a great way to get the right shade for your own artwork. Although again, this does have the obvious downside, and that's consistency. If you are working on small projects, say a dish or a pot stand, then mixing your own is absolutely fine, just try to make sure you've got enough for the job. And even if you do need to add a little bit more, as long as it's pretty much the same colour, your project will look just fine. If you're going to be completing a large project though, like a table for example, and you're going to need to be mixing up your grout in batches, then it is very, very much easier to just go out and buy the shade of grout that you're after, otherwise you'll risk it looking completely different in patches all over the piece. But that's not to say that you can't mix your own grout for a larger project. It just means you're going to have to take the time to create a recipe for your own grout style, to make sure that you can recreate it as perfectly as possible with each of the different batches that you put together. Which is why ultimately for a lot of larger projects, it eventually becomes a lot easier to just buy the premix, unfortunately. As I'm sure you can see though, with grouts there are a lot of options out there, and while white is probably going to be the go-to colour for most beginners, it is always fun to experiment and see what different effects you can make, and as grout is such a forgiving material to work with, plus it's not too expensive, it is well worth just having that play and seeing what you can come up with for your own projects. Bit of extra personalisation for them. But I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial all about grouting your mosaics. Happy crafting everyone, and I'll see you again soon.